right, ladies and gentlemen, my name is AK Rex. I am the king of the House Rex and the newly recruited knight of the Fandom Menace, and I have a special guest named Harry Wilson, who you already know by now, also known as Harry the Fox. Harry, welcome to our last installment from the current series of the show. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing great as well. Just not looking as great as I usually do, so that's why you only see my avatar, which is much better looking than I am at the moment. But otherwise, other than that, everything is hunky dory. So
Excellent.
let's get into this, ladies and gentlemen and ladies. We've got this topic that we wanted to quickly cover is just focus on the Australian megafauna. We are not going to be able to cover everything, but we will cover some of the nitty-gritty bits and pieces. So this is your work. This is saying that it's awaiting upgrade. So could you explain what does it mean when you say awaiting upgrade?
So basically, I sometimes just take the laziest option and find a skeletal and just do a quick, sometimes, and this is more in the past. These days, I don't do that kind of thing. But I just, use some improv skeletals, mainly based on Plastosaurus with some estimates and stuff and reconstructions. But this time, I've actually found a really awesome study by McHenry that meticulously puts the animal together. And the reason that I haven't already done it is because these things actually take a lot of time because I have to manually, piece together each and every individual bone, pretty much like McHenry did. And luckily, because McHenry already did it, I'm just reading through. But it is a huge, huge thesis. I think pretty sure it's a thesis, and it's a study anyway, and it is incredibly meticulous. So for anyone who's wondering what on earth I'm talking about, this is the background. Kronosaurus queenslandicus has always just been known from fragments. There's never really been a complete skeleton or even a remotely complete-ish skeleton like you get with Leopleurodon and other plesiosaurs, prehistoric animals in general. Kronosaurus is always just, bits and pieces of snout, bits of flippers, bits of bones, bits of vertebrae, and they're all just scattered all over the place. And for a long time, no one really knew how long they grew, how big they grew, how elongated they were, whether they had incredibly long tubular bodies, which is what the specimen, it's in North America. It's the famous one you see in all the photos where it's in that big glass tank against the wall and there's all these people walking past it. This study actually investigated if the precise proportions of the animal based on all the known specimens of Kronosaurus queenslandicus as well as boyacensis as well. So he managed to put it all together and he found that its proportions were actually very similar to the Stratosaurus reconstruction, which is an attempt to reconstruct Plesiosaurus using Leopleurodon. And so that as well was disputable because the vertebrae had different proportions on Leopleurodons and Plesiosauruses. They're about 25% narrower in diameter if you were to match the lengths. But putting this together, it turns out that it probably did have similar proportions. It just had an extra thick backbone in its body. So overall, this is a rough substitute that I want to upgrade later. It's the skull scaled to the largest one that Henry looked at, scaled to the length he recommended. I want to actually go through it and try and find the bones and reposition them and try and get the vertical sort of dimensions of the centrums and try to reposition them in a natural curve at the back. I'm also investigating, how McHenry came to the conclusions of certain body parts. Like, in the classic Kronosaurus skull, you have that giant sagittal, basically that big crest along the cranium where the jaw muscles attach, and McHenry omitted that. So I'm just, meticulously trying to find exactly on all the bases to, find, to be able to say as much as I can when I do the reconstruction, because I might as well do it properly. So yeah, that's basically it. And Kronosaurus itself is an interesting animal. It's a plesiosaur in the very broad sense. It's not actually closely related to Plesiosaurus and Leopleurodon compared to the things you'll find in the Northern Hemisphere, it's there's a different group of plesiosaurs. I've completely forgot what they're called, but they usually more live around America, South America, and obviously Australia. They usually have, different proportioned spines, and the skulls are a little differently shaped. And in the case of Kronosaurus, it has an interesting shape where it has a really wide sort of jugal kind of area. So the back of the skull, where the cheeks are, and it sort of broadens and then narrows down quickly to a long, slim sort of snout. And the teeth are absolutely massive. And we know that this is definitely an animal that had a huge amount of crushing power and preyed very much on other large reptiles in the sea. And because you can see quite a few with injuries inflicted by Kronosaurus that usually crush skulls and, skeletons with teeth stuck in them and other nasty injuries. So this was absolutely a very large macropredator, which would have been about the same size as the largest plesiosaurs around the world, quite potentially.
So the other thing as well, if my memory does not fail me, is that Kronosaurus was actually, in comparison to other plesiosaurs, was later in terms of the time period on the time frame. It was early Cretaceous, I believe, which is approximately equivalent, I think, within the time when in North America when Acrocanthosaurus was around. So we're talking like 112-ish, whatever, that sort of area of the time, give or take, of course, because I would not remember all of the dates. But with plesiosaurs, other plesiosaurs like the Plesiosaurus and the Liplorodon, Ferox and stuff, they were around in the late Jurassic, and in some cases I think they were going from about 160 something or 160 to about 145 million years ago. So we are talking quite a big time gap between them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll find a lot of animals that were found, prehistoric animals in Australia, and possibly even a few modern animals. Australia is odd because of its strange isolation. As far as the lost world goes, the stories about that little island somewhere or valley, and it's so isolated that all these prehistoric animals still are today. Australia has, for most of its history, literally been that by the standards of prehistoric animals. There are even more extremes, but Kronosaurus is definitely an example of plesiosaurs, specifically large macropredatory plesiosaurs, outliving all their northerly counterparts around the world by a huge long time. They outlast them for ages. It's absolutely amazing.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Well, in this case, we'll be waiting for you to update it later with a new piece. And whenever you get another segment, which I'm sure you will on the channel, then we will go over your updates as well and just continue finding excuses to talk about these things.
Absolutely. Always happy to.
Good to hear. So let's move on to the next piece right here. And let me just make sure that it's properly adjusted, and it is. So, the marsupial lion, which, of course, I would say it's more of a nickname than it is actually reflective of what this animal really is. So, would you want to tell us a little bit about that one?
Oh, wow. So, this is a bit of a backstory. So, Australia's marsupials, even as far as marsupials go from around the world and fossil records, are extremely unusual and very derived. There's more or less two broad families living today. There's the polyprotodonts, which Tasmanian devil, the thylacine, they are more like an ordinary mammal. They look a lot like carnivora, actually. A lot of their skeletal muscular skin anatomy is very similar. And even though they're, of course, marsupials, which are animals, with pouches, they have the extra large, thick tails, which placental mammals can't have. I'm guessing because they have such tiny babies, they can afford to have a thicker tail to take up the extra space. And that's a real, thing that all marsupials do. Their babies aren't exactly babies. They're like barely more than an embryo. They just sort of crawl out and go into this secondary pouch that's attached to the mother and live there, and then they incubate a bit more and grow into proper babies. So that's all marsupials, including this animal. But this is what's particularly unusual about this animal. The other group of marsupials are called diprotodonts, which means they have two different types of teeth. And that's because instead of having, the three sets of teeth that we have, which is, molars, canines, and incisors, they went the path of being herbivorous. Their canines more or less disappeared. And if any animal was solidified in eating plants with their giant, incisors and the big, giant, munchy molars, it would be them.
Yeah, we'll get to them in a second, by the way, because I've got them ready as well for you to look at. So whenever you're ready, let me know when we can just transcend into that as well.
All right, so this is a strange thing. Ironically, it turns out a few marsupials actually did go carnivorous and reverted back, and usually their canines simply just regrew. However, there is one very terrifying example. It takes the whole Jurassic Park nature found a way around this drawback and managed to turn it into the most horrifying set of jaws ever. And this is the marsupial lions. We're not exactly sure what type of marsupials they are. Like, even, the Australian Museum, says that there's a lot of people, there's a lot of people that says they're wombatiform. Some say they're related to possums. But it's a bit unusual because they don't quite have the exact same features. They're probably something very basal because they've retained the big, thick rudder tail. It's not rudder tail. It's actually a very just thick, massive, meaty tail. They've retained a lot of ancestral features, and a lot of the things they thought inherited from wombats turned out to just be convergent. So without further ado, I'll go and describe this animal in more detail. The teeth I was talking about, instead of growing back its fangs, it instead lost most of its molars and just have more or less a huge set of giant, thick molars that are like blades of an axe that are sharpened and perfect for just chopping through meat like it's not a big deal. Their incisors also grew sharp and they grew broader. And even though it looks like they have buck teeth like a rodent, they actually have very short teeth. It's just that the part of the mouth that the incisors grow from actually points downwards, which adds more skeletal strength towards the middle and actually means they can have very short, durable teeth instead. Then their jaw strength is so powerful that the one you see in that picture at that size will have the same biting force as a very, very large lion twice that size. So the Katanga lions I depicted in my other chart, they'd have the same jaw strength. It's just that unlike the lions, this thing actually has choppy axe blades for teeth.
Scary. This is the other thing that's interesting. You note in the description here that it is in fact very similar overall in size to jaguars. And if you came across a wild jaguar, it would probably have a go at you. And this thing, I would imagine, would be quite happy to have a go at you as well if given the opportunity, if you were, poking around without knowing what's going on, etc. So,
and here's a bit of a terrifying trivia. The ancestors of the Aborigines very likely lived alongside these animals, and it's possible that they even depicted them in cave art. So that's something terrifying to think about.
And do we have any remains of encounters where they are documented in any way, or maybe like skull remains where there are some traces of things being crushed or otherwise devoured?
Well, so we don't have any evidence of people being eaten by it as far as I'm aware. We do have evidence of diprotodon. Now, we'll get to that soon, but just so you know, diprotodons weigh like 3 or 4 tons. They are huge animals. And one of their, I think it was their femur or the humerus, or basically a very large bone from clearly a diprotodon, had sort of cut marks that were clearly made by the marsupial lion's teeth. So they can, it looks like they don't actually try to bite through bone that much, but they can clearly make big scrapes in it. And it seems they prefer to gnaw the meat off and just leave the bones where they are. That said, if they got around a vertebrae or a weak skull, given the mechanics of how the jaws work, there'd be no doubt they could just crush it flat.
Oh, scary things indeed. For such a small animal, if you were to look at it, of course, at the overall standards. But I mean, for mammalian standards, they're actually, and predators, they go quite well in that sense, though that's that's what you would expect from most mammalian predators on land.
Yeah. And this is a curious thing, and you'll see this in a lot of predatory animals. Sometimes you never see extremely big ones for the reason that those animals don't actually have to be big to take down very large prey. You see that with wolverines, and you can clearly see that with the marsupial lion. It can take down the same size prey as a lion can, and it can afford to be half the size and inflict the same amount of damage. I should also add that the teeth aren't the only nasty thing about it. The claws are absolutely massive, probably close to my fingers and thumb in size, or at least the thumb claw is about the same size as my thumb. It's probably the size of a small velociraptor, the main digit claw. And, second toe, I believe. And it's actually similar size, and that's just the thumbs it has on its paws. It would definitely have grappled prey, and they actually did some mechanical tests in comparing it to modern marsupial predators. It probably... So there's a lot of people who think it could have climbed trees. It could have, but it was definitely not a specialist at climbing trees. It was just something that it could sort of do if it wanted to. So I guess maybe, again, like a lion. So ironically, even though this is not remotely related to lions in any shape or form, remotely, it is a very similar functional, analog. It's got a lot in common in terms of just by sheer accident of divergent evolution managed to copy a lot of its capabilities.
Yeah, makes sense. So it's it just basically replicated the model, kind of, coincidentally they just kind of happened to follow this path. So, all right. So let's go to the as you mentioned, let me quickly share this screen right here, and I wanted to discuss the diprotodons.
Excellent.
So let's have a look to see how well we can see them. Well, I mean, obviously you can see different ones here. There's one on the right is the diprotodon, and this is the other one. It's just a random image I found online. You can probably make out the name, both, and the mass. But again, this site gives them. This guy is he's I think he's a professional Paleoartist from either Ukraine or Russia. And
I know the guy. Yep.
You probably know him, yeah. And
I don't know him, but I know of him. Roman, he's excellent.
Yeah, he usually gets it quite well. There are things you have to obviously look into more detail to make sure that, because sometimes I think there were some things that I noticed felt a little bit inconsistent, but I can't remember what part of info it was. He doesn't seem to do dinosaurs. He just seems to focus on mostly the Cenozoic era stuff, and occasionally Permian with very rare examples. But anyway, this is his work. So shout out to you, Roman. Well done on everything. A very big fan of your work overall, anyway. And so is Harry, it seems. So Harry, would you mind talking about these guys? I believe both of them are from Australia.
Yep. All the diprotodontid, anything. So when I said diprotodont, that is, I mean basically every remotely diprotodontoid thing to which diprotodon is obviously a member. As far as I'm aware, they're all from Australia. They all evolved in Australia. And the ones you find in Australia are actually a huge evolutionary distance from other marsupials you get in South America and North America, for that matter, like the possum, or which we call the opossum, because as far as we're concerned, our possums are the real possums. But anyway, moving on, the diprotodont would be probably more similarly related to wombats, properly this time. Even though they're still actually very distantly related. It's just they kind of fit into the broader, wide wombatiformish kind of family, or at least they're close related compared to other diprotodonts like kangaroos and stuff. Diprotodon is Australia's largest ever mammal. As I said, it grows to a size between the black rhino and the white rhino. Well, probably closer to the white rhino if some sources are, turn out to be true. However, it would have weighed less because it was leaner. Had a leaner build, longer limbs, slimmer body. This doesn't look like it, but trust me, compared to a white rhino, this is slim and gracile and elegant. It's not as tanked up as a white rhino is. They were definitely herbivores. They were abundant all over Australia. They seemed to, especially like the lusher climates, which, believe it or not, used to actually represent Australia up until the last, I don't know, 100,000 or so years, when it started to turn to the dried up barren desert it is today. The more immediate diprotodont family does split into lots of different variants. So the one you see here, Urozygoma, that's what the name is. I've seen it before, but I forgot the name. That is also a variant. They actually have found skulls with the wide cheekbones. I don't think anyone really quite knows what they were for, or if they were just wide cheekbones were just there. There were ones that had reinforced, bumpy kind of bones on their nose, which makes people think that we might have had diprotodonted rhino mimics. And there are some that had receded nasals that cause speculation they might have had trunks or prehorses. I think that's what the fake trunks are called. No one's quite sure yet. I think there's a bit of discussion about that. But they do come in all shapes and sizes, and they were pretty much one of the main mega herbivores of Australia. They were definitely the largest by quite a mile.
Yeah, Diprotodon, in fact, this one right here, as far as I know, the genus itself has multiple species, but I'm not entirely sure how they're distinguished, maybe by locality and maybe a few other anatomical things, which I'm not aware of. But the genus seems to be the largest representative of them all.
Yep, absolutely. I'm pretty sure that the different relatives of Diprotodon did actually seem to live in overlapping areas. I think they discovered a recent formerly lush area that's obviously now desert, surprise, where fossils of all these different animals coexisted. So that is something interesting to keep in mind. They definitely had overlapping climates in the broader areas. I don't know within the specific species and inside the genus if that varied between climate or location. It is possible.
Right, gotcha. All right, so we're ready to get to the next creature then.
Let's
just score them out one by one. I mean, well, obviously the protodons, man, kind of makes me wonder. Maybe I could try and attempt to make a sculpt of one in 1 to 20 scale. That would probably look quite nice.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, that would be really awesome to see.
So we can give that a bit of a go. Hold on a sec. What was I going for? Yes. So we're going to go for the Megalania prisca, basically.
Yes.
The famous varanid. And we'll get into this in a second once I do that.
So, yes, this is going to be something a lot of people are wondering about. This was Australia's apex predator pretty much during the Cenozoic, I guess. It's about a similar size as a saltwater crocodile. There is some debate about the precise proportions of the skeleton because they're different fragments from different pieces. I'm actually something I wanted to look into myself one day. There are fossils that do suggest it actually grew as big as you see depicted. It is a huge lizard. There's speculation as to how powerful its jaw is, and that's something I also wanted to look into because there's research into varanids suggests they have a weak bite force and they rely on either venom or venom. Actually, it is technically venom. It's just that it's a weak venom and they rely on bacteria or just ripping open wounds to do the real damage. Their venom is very weak. Varanids are venomous. It's just that they're barely qualify as venomous. So if anyone ever says they're venomous, they're technically right, but barely. And they usually rely on other things to do the work. But there's a lot of stories about the ordinary modern Australian varanids, which is goannas and parentes, biting off people's fingers without much trouble. So I can't say what the bite force would have been with considering all that. I'm trying to find out about the stories about the goannas. Apparently they're true. So, and that would actually take quite a lot of force for a lizard with a head, about this big to actually do that, for a solid bone on a person. So it's possible. I can't answer that. But anyway, so the point is these were definitely powerful animals and they would have been very close related to both the goannas and the Komodo dragons. And you can actually use a Komodo dragon as a basis to assess how strong it would be and how its predatory strategy would work, which is probably just to sneak in through the grass and bite onto a diprotodon or something, whatever it wanted, really. There's nothing that could really stop it being attacked. So it would have been an apex predator, wouldn't have had any predators of its own, it would have been far too strong to be threatened, and it would have been able to attack whatever it felt like.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, it would definitely be able to take down anything that is of a small size that it can just grab onto, toss around a little bit, like a smaller size, maybe rodent of some kind, and just swallow it whole, or maybe like reptile of some kind, maybe smaller snake or whatever else it could find. Anything of a decent enough size is definitely on the menu, and anything that is bigger perhaps would be a bit more challenging, but not completely out of the realm of possibility. So.
Well, there's an interesting thing, and apparently Parentes do a little bit of this. Although it's a vastly, you can definitely verify it with Komodo dragons. Their strategy of attacking larger animals is just to walk up to them, bite them, rip a nasty injury in it, and just let them bleed out and just follow them. Because lizards can wait a long time before they actually eat. They're patient. If they inflict an injury that they know is going to be lethal on prey, that's it. They can stand back, wait, follow them around, wait until they die of exhaustion or just collapse and have lunch.
To kind of further, just rub the meme a little bit more into the, so to say, this is not your Tyrannosaurus Rex, basically. So it's not gonna go and just overpower as far as I can tell, because we know that Tyrannosaurus jaws were just definitely designed to exert a lot of power to basically just physically overpower their prey.
Yes.
This one would probably be more of a patient hunter, so it would not rely on the same tactics, and this could explain maybe the differences in their skulls and potentially many other features which many people these days try to equate to them, which I don't believe were present, and we don't have any evidence of being present. But we are not going to get into this here, but you know what I mean.
Yep, I do. I absolutely do.
We will get into this some other time for sure, because I plan to make more segments about just talking about reconstructions and restorations, just dedicated video on just that topic alone with you specifically. So
yep, I definitely have a lot to say about that, but that not for now.
I know you got a lot to say as well, so that's why I'm definitely going to bring you on again to talk about these things, because there's a lot that needs to be said. So let's grab another image right here. So this devilish looking turtle, which is very interesting, it's a melania. I believe the size that was picked here is actually a biggest size of undescribed species. So it will be just Melania SP dot, pretty much. And the cool thing about it is that despite how devilish it looks, I believe this species was a herbivore, wasn't it?
Well, that's the interesting thing. So I don't know much about this animal, but I do know a lot about Australian turtles. We don't have any contemporary tortoises today. So when I define turtles and tortoises and terrapins, I will basically categorize turtles and terrapins as turtles, because apparently they're a little more closely related and they're functionally similar, with streamlined shells and ability to swim, while true tortoises are the stumpy-legged, dome-shaped shell ones. So we definitely don't have true tortoises today. We do have a lot of freshwater terrapins, and they are the most abundant thing around Australia. They are actually really fast-moving, by the way. I've actually caught a few when I was a kid, and I can catch them in the water because I'm a fast swimmer, but I put it on land because I thought it'd be funny watching it, try to, vainly waddle off. The second I put it on the ground, it just gone. It just 3 meters in a second, it was gone. It escaped. But anyway, so this would be interesting if it was a true tortoise. Do they know exactly if that was the case?
This is the thing I don't really know. I believe they have their own family, which is a male, which I can look up in a second. It's very easy. Give me 2 seconds.
Sure.
Melania. And they qualify them as Melanidae. So that's the family. And It's called they classify them as the extinct genus of stem turtle.
Ah, interesting. Well, that makes a lot of sense, because that would actually make a bit of a difference. So stem turtle as in more or less terrapin territory?
Probably, yeah. That's what I would think. I'm a little rusty on understanding my testudines. I kind of think
Oh,
maybe it
same.
might be a good idea to brush up on them a bit because there are some really awesome, interesting things that they represent. They're really cool because, well, they have armor, they have some cool looking things about them, and their beaks and all that stuff. So definitely interesting animals.
And it's interesting they take this shape because this would be a very unusual shape for the usual types of turtles and terrapins in the sense that they are usually very streamlined. But then again, you get sort of alligator snapping turtles, which vary that up as well. In terms of dietary niches, I do know that terrapins and turtles are very much omnivorous. They, depending on the species, they can eat, vegetation, they can eat animals. I know our river turtles are very predatory. They can definitely catch fish, and I think some might eat small snakes as well. I'm not sure, but there might be crustaceans as well. They eat whatever they like, but the same could be true for this one. It really depends on its mobility, and that's probably the main differentiation that I would give for all those animals is that the dome-shaped tortoises are herbivorous simply because they just don't have any choice. They have to eat plants because they're too slow to actually catch anything. The other two are very mobile in and out of water. Well, terrapins are mobile in and out of water. Sea turtles are mobile in the water, and the sea turtles, on land, we know what they're like. But they can catch prey, and they also can acquire food that they can eat. Sadly, this is not an animal I know that much about, but I reckon it would be worth exploring in the future. It'd definitely give me new ideas for something to chase up on.
Yeah, you could include one of them in your potential future charts, along with I think it's an Asian extinct species of a land of a turtle, which I think it's a tortoise that's similar to the elephant tortoise or something like that.
Oh wow, that sounds pretty
bigger. Cool. It's the biggest ever terrestrial tortoise. It's called I think it's Megalocheles atlas. I think that's the species name, which I don't have on me, but because we're doing the Australian stuff right now. But look it up sometime later. I think it was somewhere in Asia. I can't remember exactly where. So, but look that up if you want for another future additions to your project. So,
yep.
Now let's see what else we can quickly go over. Mataborosaurus.
Yes, mataborosaurus. So I suppose it could be a very distant relative of Iguanodon. It's very clearly, and that's basically just an approximate. They're very, very, very divergent from any ornithopod for quite a long time, and they can grow to massive sizes. There have been humongous footprints that indicated a megatheropod, maybe a very large Allosaurus or even Tyrannosaurus-sized foot, and it turns out it was actually this animal. I'm looking into exactly how big they can grow, but they were absolutely the largest non-sauropod dinosaurs in Australia. They've been known for a long time. They keep finding fossils, so they were probably a very successful animal. And so I don't know exactly the size, but they are massive. They could probably grow to a similar size as the broad, Edmontosaur sort of family, maybe the smaller end of the scale, but they were certainly very large dinosaurs, and I have no idea if they had any predators or not, because we haven't actually found many predatory dinosaurs, and definitely not ones remotely close to their size.
Yeah, this is one of the things that's very interesting, and I have to note that this was probably the best sort of looking image of Mataborosaurus I could find on the web off the bat, but this probably does not represent what you described, because obviously maybe because of the footprints they don't show the exact proportions and size of what the skeleton would have been like, so it's quite difficult to associate footprints and reconstruct based on that alone, and it just produces some really ambiguous and potentially erroneous results. So, but according to my recollection, the mataborosaurus belongs to a family called Rhabdodontidae, which is basically named after the type genus Rhabdodon. And the Rhabdodon genus, in fact, lived during the late Maastrichtian of Eurasia.
Oh wow, now
Yeah,
that's interesting because
very interesting.
that is a very unusual thing. Because I'm pretty sure for much of Australia's history, Asia was very far out of reach, and you could even say it was mostly isolated from the rest of Gondwana for most of its time, especially starting from the Jurassic. There was always giant mini seas separating it from, I think it was Antarctica, and with only narrower land bridges that were just constantly changing and never really just disappearing entirely until Australia, being one of the first parts of that supercontinent to actually break away from it. So this could have indicated a very early migration pattern, unless, of course, there might have been a temporary, I don't know, tectonic approach of continents, but I imagine it could have more likely been an early migration. I can't answer that question, but
the latter as well, like the early migration, because otherwise, convergently, families like this, either it's wrongfully represented by the modern science. It's one of the possibilities, by the way. So there's always a possibility that we might turn out that Mataborosaurus may have indeed not been a true rhabdodontid. Maybe it was one of the, more basal members or something of the sort, or maybe it was just a completely different thing, to be honest, because before that we used to think they were all the same exact family, but it's not an iguanodontid. It's a completely different family. Still, rhabdodontomorphs are, kind of slightly going into a different area, although they look very much the same in some cases, but they are in fact, very different. So lots of look into here, but yeah, this is basically what I was going to say. It's also one of the better known, I think, dinosaurs in Australia overall. In fact, one of the best probably known in terms of the fossil, right?
Yep, absolutely. It hands down our most well understood dinosaur. We don't actually have a lot of dinosaurs that are known from particularly complete remains. So Mataborosaurus, being as abundant and intact as it is very exceptional.
Cool. So let's cover the next creature, which I will bring up in a second. And I really wanted to talk about this one. We only have about 2 more to do, and that's it. So we should be able to even make it in the time frame that we need to. But let's get into this one. Now this thing is called Kulasukus clelandii.
Yes.
From, I believe it's early Cretaceous of Australia.
Yes, and everyone, you heard that right, Cretaceous. This animal is related to, the same group of animals that Prionosuchus came from. And when was Prionosuchus? When did that date?
It was like either late, I think it was late Permian or something of South America.
Yeah, so this is not an error. This is an animal that, from the family that existed more or less before the dinosaurs did, and it lived into the Cretaceous. And again, Australia is a bizarre time warp where incredibly ancient animals managed to survive long after their relatives went extinct elsewhere in the world. And Kulasukus is no exception. When I first read that, I was just shocked. I had to read it again to make sure, read another source to make sure that source didn't get it wrong. Then I had to wonder if I got it wrong all along and if these animals were really Cretaceous. No, they're actually just a long surviving amphibian. And they are huge, easily 5 meters long, probably just big enough to swallow a person. And they also have teeth as well. They have little jaw fossils with actual little teeth inside them.
Yeah, they would have been quite nasty to come across if they were around these days. Because, fish as big as that can easily attack a human, like, without a problem if provoked, or if it decides to just poke at you. And this thing would probably be no different, I would imagine. You would definitely be able to bite something off.
or swallow you whole. Or I'm sure it could find
Yeah,
a way.
I mean, if you're like a kid, who just like swims around without being careful and being completely clueless, you'd be basically in its belly.
Yep, absolutely. I'm sure there are plenty of places around the world where that's still true today.
Yeah, true. Although I don't believe that kulasukus was involved in these accidents, but we have yet to see, for those who like to believe that there may be still these extinct animals around, but we just haven't found them yet living today. So keep dreaming, but we'll see. If you find one, let me know. I'll be the first in line to have a look. So, but yeah, definitely an iconic and something that I personally was looking into in terms of making, a model of as well. So, and they would probably be quite easy to make as well because of the relatively smooth looking skin and stuff like that. So, it would be nice to do in 1:20 scale.
There is something. Okay, now I might be wrong about this, but I think they managed to find bits of the skull that look a bit rugose. I am not sure if I looked at it correctly because I was just already too blown back by the time it appeared and how big it could grow. Just to get an idea of its size, if you ignore Prinosuchus, because Prinosuchus is about twice its size,
it's the biggest amphibian ever, actually. Prinosuchus.
After Prinosuchus, this is easily contender for second place, maybe third. It's absolutely massive. It would definitely be a formidable, more or less apex predator within its environment.
It competes in size with, I believe, a European Triassic. I think it's a Triassic amphibian called Mastodonsaurus, which would have seen mentioned there and then, and there are quite a lot of different fossils of species preserved. So, yeah, okay. So, are we happy with the kulasukus? Shall we do the last one and then just sprint off after that?
All right.
Let's quickly do the last one. We've got something. Hold on a second. We got something very interesting for the last creature, and specifically, it's this.
Oh yes, quincana. Now that is an interesting one indeed. So from what I gather, it's so you'll notice this depicted on land because there's a fair amount of speculation that is fairly grounded that it would have been a terrestrial crocodile, one that specifically evolved from aquatic crocodiles, or at least to some extent, probably a bit more basal than that. So it's not exactly like one of those ultra ancient archosaurians that, in the crocodile family that became terrestrial. This would have been closer to a true crocodile that became terrestrial. And the reason is because its skull shape and its teeth shape aren't like normal crocodiles. They're more sort of for cutting and more typical of something you might see in a dinosaur maybe. And I don't exactly know how much of the skeleton they have. I sadly don't think it's that much. But because of the strange shape of the skull and the teeth, it's based on that speculation that it probably walked around on land. And that's not too outlandish because, as I mentioned before, we do actually have a crocodile that can move very fast on land, but keep in mind it's also a tiny little crocodile. It's about 2 meters long.
Yeah,
it's the freshwater.
Yeah, freshwater croc. Yeah.
So you can imagine an animal like the freshwater crocodile coming on land, deciding it starts to get good at catching things on land, and then just continues to do that. Or maybe it was during a drought. I can't speculate, but this is a very interesting animal that I also again want to look into as well in much more detail. But even just on the basis of the jaws and the skull and the teeth, it really raised a lot of questions as to how this animal came about.
One last point to ask you about the quincana is whether or not you believe, it would have been able to compete with Megalania prisca.
Oh, absolutely.
So they would basically be actively trying to, outdo each other, since that would mean, if it's depicted the way it is, it would very much mean that they would share some prey items and they would occasionally try to settle territorial disputes, maybe attack each other's babies or something like that.
Yeah, I imagine it would. It would have. So, just an idea, because a lot of people were probably thinking, okay, so we have a crocodile, but what else? This animal would have been about the same size as Megalania. It would have been an absolutely massive animal, probably about similar size as the modern saltwater crocodile, and it could have easily competed with Megalania. And I suspect, just by sheer virtue that it is a crocodile with giant jaws, that it probably would have had the upper hand and probably would have won those contests. Well, then again, it could have just been the fact that maybe, despite everything, it might have still been more grounded to the water, perhaps, because I think Megalania is a little more widespread. But that said, it is definitely a formidable predator, and the fact that it could grow to such a huge size and have such a decent representation in its own right, it would have had to be successful as well.
Yeah, it's one of those things that if you have basically two similarly sized, similar body plan-ish, obviously I'm generalizing here, animals, but one of them also happens to have armor, and we know for a fact that something like Megalania or just any variant, just lizards in general, they are not suited to actually bite through armor or tackle creatures that are armored or bypass it in that sort of way. So they would pretty much have to give ground unless they were able to psychologically intimidate them or something like that. So
there is something, actually. I'm pretty sure in that recently discovered Eden, if you will, in I think it was in Queensland, where they discovered all those new species of kangaroo. I'm pretty sure that these and Megalania were both found in that area. So that is something to keep in mind. They would have very likely actually coexisted in some manner, or if not, lived in the same geographical range.
I wanted to also say that obviously because we're kind of approaching the time now, but quick honorable mentions to this really crazy looking kangaroo, which I believe is a short-faced kangaroo and was probably the biggest kangaroo of all time. So we'll give that a bit of a shout out. I don't have the image, but I wanted to quick do an honorable mention of that as well at the end.
Oh, absolutely. I do have a little bit of time to talk about it, so I can definitely go into detail. The short-faced kangaroo is an extinct form of kangaroo that is actually very unusual in a lot of ways. It's okay. So if anyone's ever heard of a movie called Tank Girl, where they had all the actors dressed up in kangaroo suits, ironically, that would have been very close to the short-faced kangaroo, if you could believe that. They're unlike normal kangaroos, which have sort of your typical boxy, long snouts with the eyes sort of a little more outwards facing. Their skulls were short. They had really tiny, short snouts. Their eyes faced more or less forwards. They also had much bigger arms and longer fingers and longer claws. They had a single toe in each foot, and they were very unusual. And they also had a very thick, heavy build, and they were huge. They were easily 2 meters, maybe a bit more tall. They were originally specified as being 3 meters tall. Oh, that's an excellent image. Always
done by Roman, by the way, as well.
Of course, Roman. Yep, I instantly recognized it. So it's called Procoptodon, and that was one of the largest species of kangaroo. So one thing I'll point out, the claim it was 3 meters tall is not taking into account the fact that it would have had a sloping spine and its posture. It wouldn't have actually been able to stand 2 meters tall just because its body shape wouldn't allow it. But that said, if somehow it could stretch out straight, it would actually be 3 meters tall. Or if it could stretch up on its, tippy toes, it could easily reach. That said, it is not actually the biggest kangaroo they found. Again, that recent area I discovered, they found an even bigger species of kangaroo, which ironically is, I think, more closely related to red kangaroos, our modern kangaroo. And just to give an idea of what red kangaroos are like, just imagine comparing picture the typical kangaroo in your mind, and you'll probably draw an analogy to a deer. The red kangaroo is an analogy to a moose or an elk. So take a kangaroo and just make it bulky and huge, and the red kangaroo is bigger than a person at the larger sizes, and it could stand about as tall as this one, but it would have leaner body, so it would have still been smaller. This newly discovered animal would have just been outright bigger. It's probably stood...
I've got one for you, I think. Hang on a sec. Hopefully this comes up properly. Just to compare quickly. Hang on. There we are.
Yeah, that is probably it. Australornis.
I can't find a good resolution image quickly, so unfortunately I struggle to read. But it's the
That's
one to
good.
the very left. If you can see that, it's kind of 250 kgs. So it's also looks like it's a short-faced kangaroo, but it's a different species from the Procoptodon.
I think there might be another one still. Actually, I'm looking into it. I'm not sure they gave it a name yet, but Thurnus. I don't know how its name's pronounced, but that is a relative to the short-faced kangaroo. There's skeletals of it, and so that's something that's interesting. Is that there are quite a few different species of humongous kangaroo. None of them are really related in the sense beyond the fact that they all come from the very broad kangaroo family. These are all, completely different families that just divergently happen to grow to huge sizes. So you have Macropus rufus, which is the modern red kangaroo, and you have Procoptodon, and there's Thurnus one, which are the short-faced kangaroos, and they recently discovered a giant, super giant, I think relative of Macropus, but they only have I think the leg bone and a few other bits that look more like a Macropus bone than a short-faced kangaroo bone, because short-faced kangaroos have thick, bulky skeletons. So that's an interesting thing as well. The kangaroos of what people don't realize is kangaroos are a very broad, diverse family, and a lot of the things you think might just be, related large kangaroos are actually just happen to all be different families that all happen to reach gigantism. And kangaroos can get big.
Yeah, that just proves another point that I always say, how a lot of times you will find animals that have very similar outside body plans and looks, but they could actually end up being completely different families from each other when you start analyzing it. And that's just to further hammer the point of how phenotype does not necessarily represent the genotype, and vice versa. You always get those things, unless you really examine it under a microscope, you might find that a lot of these things don't quite appear to be what they turn out to be in reality. It's on paper, yeah, but it's just like saying, Carcharodontosaurids and Tyrannosaurids, have very similar body plans because they follow similar patterns. But then you start examining, it turns out that something like a Deinocheirus is actually closer related to a Tyrannosaurid than a Giganotosaurus is, for example. So there's that.
That's right.
So yeah, kangaroos, man, they're one of the mean. They are quite mean animals, if you can call it that.
They
well,
are.
Aren't they?
They are. They're brutes. They so everyone likes to think of kangaroos as nice, fluffy animals that are really nice. In petting zoos, they are, because they know they're getting fed. In the wild, you really don't want to go near them. I mean, they run away usually, but if you were to try, but red kangaroos, not so much. If I had a dog who tried to attack one and he got booted in the face, that little trick where you might have seen in cartoons where it stands on its tail and uses its legs to kick, that's real. They actually do that.
Yeah, that's why you don't want to be sparring with these things unless you're wearing like full plate armor, probably, and even then you're risking of getting like bamboozled.
Concussion. Well, an interesting thing about kangaroos, a lot of people don't realize, they are functionally pentapedal animals. That is, they actually use their tail to walk as a fifth limb when they're walking on the ground. Like, they can hop bipedally, but they only really do that when they really need to get somewhere in a hurry. Otherwise, they'll just amble around on their forelimbs, then using the tail and forelimbs to hold themselves up, they move their hind limbs forward, and then they lift their tail up, kind of the way a caterpillar moves its tail, and then they repeat the process.
I heard that they're I don't know if you can call it contemporary, but like cohabitants, koalas are much nicer animals in terms of interacting with humans in comparison to the kangaroos.
Yeah, I mean, any of the animals you get in the petting zoo are going to be friendly towards humans, or otherwise we wouldn't let them interact with humans. I mean, I might be a bad example because there's a local koala park where they have tame dingoes, and the dingoes wanted me to pat them when they were being taken for their walk. And I don't think that's supposed to happen, but they kind of bulled through a crowd and walked up to me. So I was like, okay. But yes, kangaroos, at least the grey kangaroos, are reasonably safe. Emus reasonably safe. Koalas, apparently they can growl and hiss and be a bit nasty in the wild, but they're usually very docile, if only because they're always doped out on eucalyptus all the time. Apparently, they ingest so much eucalyptus that it actually might make them a little high or drunk, maybe.
Oh my god, this is probably a local meme in the country, I would imagine.
It could be. I wanted to find that out as well, but that was apparently spreading. So yeah, they are docile-ish. They have a pretty nasty growly sound. Oh, an interesting thing about koalas, I think it's on their hands, they actually have 2 thumbs. 3 fingers, 2 thumbs. So it's more like, can't do it. There we are. So it's like a really weird live long and prosper. They have 2 opposing thumbs and 3 normal digits.
Oh, crazy stuff. Well, that's Australia for you in a nutshell, guys. So, that 1 hour, we pretty much covered all the basics. And of course, if you guys believe that we haven't covered all of the other nitty-gritty things, feel free to leave the comment below and let us know what else would you like us to cover in terms of the Australian animals, and maybe any other topics that you would like to get into. Me and Harry already have a long list of things anyway, but to add to that list at any point.
Yeah, and also, if anyone wants to know anything about ordinary Australian animals without the usual embellishments about how outrageously dangerous they all are or how supposedly they can do this and that, I'm happy to tell it straight.
Okay, perfect. That sounds good. It sounds like another potential topic added to the already never-ending list of topics to talk about on the channel. If only we had that many hands to, get to them, at the same time. So,
absolutely.
Are you happy with everything so far, Harry? Or have we covered everything for this purpose, at least?
Yeah, I think so. I think we did quite a lot of areas, and I even, learned about a new turtle terrapin animal today as well. So I do know we have a lot of giant turtles. I know we have a sea turtle about the same size as the leatherback that was prehistoric, but yeah, I never knew about that one before. So that's definitely an amazing discovery for me.
Cool. Awesome sauce. Well, anyways, guys, thanks very much for tuning in and watching the video, and make sure you leave a like. So press that like button as hard as you can. And make sure you give Harry a follow on his DeviantArt account, and also can find him and his portfolio on my Discord server. And subscribe to the channel if you're new, and we will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.
Bye.